Also have a terrible social life. Have nowhere else to go on a Thursday night. Let me first of all, can I pay tribute to Alan and for setting up Scotland Matters. This really matters a great deal, and it's wonderful that he and so many of you are putting in the work, even when at the moment there is no second referendum. Because if there is another referendum, and I'll come on to whether we actually face that prospect or not, if there is another referendum, it won't be one during the campaign, it'll be one now. The last referendum was won because we were fighting it for 40 years, ever since the Hamilton by-election in November 1967, when Winnie Ewing won a Labour seat. And from that moment, the media were obsessed with the SNP, with nationalism. And the debate continued right up until 2014 and sadly hasn't stopped. But let me say this, because this follows on what Alan said about comments that he'd made on Facebook. We need to be respectful of our opponents. Now, the reason we need to be respectful of our opponents is not because to do otherwise generates bad publicity and criticism. That's not why. We need to be respectful of our opponents because we respect them, because they're fellow Scots, and they are absolutely just as entitled to their view on independence as we are. And when we see so many women especially leaving the House of Commons at this election because of the abuse they've received on Twitter, because of physical threats, when I was elected as an MP, I got a panic button had to be installed in my house. This is the reality now of working as a democratic politician. And it doesn't matter what party you're in, whether it's the SNP, or Labour or Conservative, doesn't matter whether you're pro-independence or anti-independence. You show respect for your opponents. You do not treat them any differently based on their sex, or their religion, or their background, or anything at all. That is how we win respect. If you don't win respect, you don't win votes. And there may come a time where we really do need to win votes. As I mentioned earlier on, I was an MP for 14 years. The original plan was that I would spend some considerable time, more than 14 years, in the Commons, but events transpired and I had a 12,500 majority in the general election of 2010. And when I left the Commons in 2015, my opponent had a 12,000 majority over me. These were swings that happened right across the country. They were unprecedented. And the reason we were hammered is because we had spent 3 years fighting for the union. And on the Saturday after I lost, I sat down and I updated my parliamentary website for the very last time. And I thanked my constituents for the opportunity to have served them for 14 years, and I pointed out my theory was that we had lost, Scottish Labour had lost, because we supported the union. We campaigned for no, we campaigned for better together, and everyone who voted yes were understandably disappointed and angry at those who had delivered that defeat to them, and they took revenge on us by uniting behind the SNP. It was as simple as that. But what I wrote on my website was this, that if that was the price that had to be paid, if me and 40 of my colleagues had to lose our seats in order to defend the union, then that was a price worth paying. Because it's better to lose your job than to lose your country. It had the merit of being true, but also had the advantage of really annoying an awful lot of nationalists who read it thinking and expecting me as a defeated candidate to be all conciliatory and to say and to ask for to apologise and say that, oh well, I got it wrong, I shouldn't have supported the union. No, I got it right. It was the right thing to do, and if I could do it all over again, I absolutely 100% would. The general election, however, in the last week has turned a particularly nasty corner thanks to my former party. I'm no longer a member of the Labour Party, mainly because of Jeremy Corbyn. Now, Jeremy comes from a particular tradition in the Labour Party and in politics of the extreme left, not Labour Party left, but extreme left, the kind of left that doesn't feel out of place sitting in a meeting with Tommy Sheridan. It's that kind of left. And that tradition has never respected the union for itself. They see the union as some kind of imperialist construct. And therefore, during the referendum, it was remarkable that so many Labour members voluntarily came out to help because they genuinely believed in the union. And the SNP were really annoyed that so many of our ordinary members were doing that. They couldn't understand why. They couldn't get the idea that we were doing it voluntarily. We weren't obeying a party whip. We were doing it because that's what we felt. But those Labour Party members who did demur from our policy, who did support a yes vote, they were all from that hard left. Now, a week before the referendum in September 2014, there was a horrible, it was all horrible, but there was a particularly horrible rally at the steps of the Royal Concert Hall in Buchanan Street, just next to the Donald Dewar statue. And we were surrounded by nationalists. It was like the last scene of Zulu. We were just standing there, holding up our no thanks posters and being surrounded by yelling nationalists who were shouting and trying to stand in the middle of us to stop us being able to take a photograph. It was really hideous. It was a horrible time. And I'll never forget that suddenly somebody said, look down there, and coming up the street towards us were 200 Labour MPs from English and Welsh constituencies. And they had all travelled up on the same train to come up and help us. And it was like Rourke's Drift. And it was wonderful. Now, the reason I mention that is because one MP who was not among them was Jeremy Corbyn. He has said since it's because he had some business in his constituency to attend to. Of course, his 200 colleagues also had business in their constituencies, but they chose to prioritise helping their Scottish comrades in a referendum that would decide the future of our nation. So Jeremy Corbyn has said this week, and nobody's surprised at this, he said a Labour government will not stand in the way of another independence referendum. Now, to me, that is personally hurtful because it means that the sacrifice I and 40 of my colleagues made in 2014 or 2015 is worthless to him. It doesn't mean anything. And it means that all those activists from all parties who campaigned so hard for a no vote in the face of some really quite aggressive opposition, it means that those efforts mean nothing to Jeremy Corbyn. They have no value. And it means that the Edinburgh Agreement, which Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon both signed back in 2012, it means that that has no value because that committed both sides to respecting the outcome. And Jeremy Corbyn has basically said, okay, I'm never going to win a majority. You're right there, Jeremy. But if I need to depend on SNP votes, we'll give them a new referendum just to get the SNP to support us. And that is a complete, it's throwing the whole of Scotland under a bus. It's saying to the Scottish people, now we all took the referendum seriously. We knew that it was important and we were told that it was a long-term decision. That what we ever decided on the 18th of September 2014 was going to be Scotland's future for at least a generation. And now Jeremy Corbyn, because it suits him, is saying no, that was pointless, that was worthless, we're going to do it all over again. So now we're in the run-up, not just a general election, but to the Scottish Parliament elections. And I had this discussion with Alan, and I've had it with a number of people, and we are all telling each other, and we are echoing the SNP line, which is that if the SNP and other nationalist parties win a majority in the Scottish Parliament in 2021, they'll have a mandate to demand a second referendum. It is a lie. Can we please stop indulging it? There can be no mandate from the Scottish Parliament for any issue that is reserved. And the Constitution is reserved. Just imagine this. Imagine if the Scottish National Party put into the manifesto a commitment to disarm Trident. And then they won a majority as they did in 2011. Do you honestly think that the UK government would say, oh well, if they've got a majority of MSPs, therefore let's just disarm Trident? No, of course not. But if you're worried about the democratic argument that, well, of course, every country should have the self-determination, should have the right to decide its own future. Well, remember this. The reason David Cameron in 2011, 2012 agreed to authorise a Section 30 order that would give the Scottish Government the right to hold a referendum. The reason he did that was not just because Salmond had won a majority in a system that was specifically designed to stop parties having a majority. The reason he agreed a referendum in 2011 was because there had never been one before. That was the crucial element. That is what made that vote unique. And if Nicola Sturgeon now stands up and says that was the template for future referendums, no, there can never be another referendum like that, because that was the first ever. There had never been one before, and the arguments for having one were actually quite strong. I supported having that referendum because I thought we could draw a line under it. But you don't draw a line under a constitutional problem by allowing the nationalists, with all their grievances, to insist on another referendum every 5 or 6 years until they get the right answer. Now, I led the Scottish Vote Leave campaign in 2016, and it was said to me throughout the campaign by the Ewan Blockley, who's a first-class councillor. I first met Ewan. Were you only 19 or something?
I was 18. Pretty good.
You make me feel old, mate. I was told throughout that campaign that a vote to leave the EU against the majority in Scotland would necessitate another independence referendum. Another lie. If you do a Google search for stuff that Nicola Sturgeon said in September 2015, 1 year after the referendum, but 9 months before the EU referendum. At that point, she was briefing that the conditions that we will expect or demand another referendum will be issued in my next speech to conference. There was never any possibility that the SNP were going to give up the ghost and say, oh well, we respect 2014, we've signed the Edinburgh Agreement, therefore we'll never ask for another referendum. Oh, Brexit, oh we'll have another referendum. This is a myth, this never happened. In between the independence referendum in 2014 and long before the 2016 EU referendum, Alex Salmond made 2 speeches, one of which he said that another referendum would be justified if austerity continued, and another occasion he said that another referendum would be justified if Britain renewed the Trident nuclear weapons system. There will always be a grievance to hand. There will always be an opportunity for the SNP to demand another referendum. In 100 years' time, if we've had 10 referendums all saying no in that time, they will come up with another reason to have a referendum. The idea that Brexit gives them this, perfect cast iron alibi for another referendum is absolutely wrong, and it's really important that we don't buy into it. Of course we have to win votes for our unionist parties in the 2021 election, but let's not do so on the basis that we're frightened that the SNP will get a mandate for another referendum. They cannot get a mandate for another referendum. Now, I was told by Alan, don't be too party political, and I'm not being too party political, but I'll tell you just now, I was asked on the Shireen show on Saturday. Shireen does this to me all the time because she knows that I'm a bit of a closet Tory these days. She said, so Tom, what are you going to vote? And I said, well, I'm not telling you I'm going to vote, but whoever I vote for, it'll have to be somebody who's committed to opposing a second independence referendum and also committed to taking us out of the EU. She said, so you're going to vote Tory? I said, I'm not saying that. I am voting Tory. Because of those 2 reasons. The Labour Party has completely disavowed itself of its own responsibilities to defend the Union. It cannot be trusted to defend the Union, and certainly it can't be trusted, despite what it said after the 2016 EU referendum, it certainly can't be trusted to take us out of the EU either, and for me that's a fundamental democratic principle, and I'm not evangelising for the Conservative Party here at all. I just wanted to see where I stood on that. Just one last thing. Most of you will have heard of King Solomon, either from your Sunday school or from the excellent 1950s film starring Hugh Brynner and Gina Lollobrigida. And you remember the most famous scene, it's the most famous story that's told of Solomon. of the two women, that are actually in the Bible described as prostitutes, but we don't need to go into that, who come to Solomon with a baby, and they put the baby down and they say, and they both argue over who's the real mother. One of them had a baby who died, and the other claimed custody of the live baby, and they both claim this baby, and so King Solomon has to decide who it belongs to. And he comes up with the great idea of cutting it in half and offering half of the baby to the mothers. And he says, well, will that please you? And one of them says, yeah, go ahead, that suits me. And the other says, oh my God, are you mad? No, she can have the baby as long as you keep it safe. So Solomon obviously knew from the reaction of the mothers, that the woman who wanted to preserve the baby's life was the true mother, the person who really loved the baby. Why am I talking about this, you may ask, and it's a good question. I wrote about this in an article in Labour Hain recently. I have a problem with the modern fashion for referendums. I'm not in favour of referendums, anyway. I have this problem, unless the issue at hand, like in the 1997 devolution referendum, where the referendum was held basically to establish and confirm what was already understood to be the will of the people. And the 1997 referendum didn't divide the country. It united the country behind a template for devolution. But in the independence referendum, and again in the EU referendum, we had this mad, insane dash for 50% of the vote plus one. In those circumstances, it is impossible to achieve an outcome that will not fatally divide a nation. And Scotland is fatally divided at the moment because of that referendum. The idea that we go into a second referendum with the same rules, a dash to 50% plus one, and at the end of that, you've got a country angry and divided and bitter. Whoever wins, even if we win, we still have a country that we love, that is divided. And that's what I mean about the Solomon story. How much do you really love your country if you are willing to have your own way, even if you fatally split it in half and set it on a new course for independence, even if it is turned in against itself? What Scottish patriot, what person genuinely loves their country and yet is willing to see that happen to their country? We've seen it once already, and now we've seen it on a UK level with Brexit. Do we really want to put this country that we love through such another divisive, unnecessary referendum? And I would say no. And one last thing, I say one last thing quite a few times on this. We need to win the argument before a referendum is even called. And we have to hope that a referendum is not called. Not because we're frightened of losing it, but because we demand that the result of the last referendum be respected, and be respected for at least a generation. And that's democratic, that's not cynical, that's democratic. But at the same time, the purpose of these meetings is to arm people with the facts so that we can win the argument in our local neighbourhoods, in our workplaces, and among our families. But I hear a lot of complacency from unionists. And I'm not going to talk an awful lot about Alex Salmond and the trial that's heading towards us. I would just caution you, don't set any store at all. Don't hope that the SNP is going to collapse just because of this particular trial. We don't know what will happen, but let me tell you, if you base a political project in the hope that a former First Minister is going to spill the beans or be found guilty or found innocent or whatever, if that is our main weapon of choice, you have chosen a very poor weapon.
Absolutely.
We can only win on the arguments, and we are in a strong position because we have the strongest arguments against nationalism. We need to win that argument, and we have to make sure, first of all, that we do not need to go through another divisive, unnecessary, ugly referendum. And this general election that's upon us now, that will decide the future of our country, not just about a future in Europe, but Scotland's future in the UK.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
just think it's like, oh, you're a former politician, but really helping people to stand back from it. You're able to give a fantastic view of the thing tonight. And I know you said that before about this, we shouldn't be expecting a referendum or thinking about it. I get the point now, and this one about dividing the country. I was thinking the other day, Aberdeen City and Shire and Edinburgh together account for a third of Scotland's GDP and a fifth of the population, which meant if they stayed in the UK, the rest of Scotland's GDP per person would go down by 18%. I worked it out. And the point that was, I was saying to Mark and Maggie actually, like you said, so let's say the British government said, I'll tell you what we'll do. In this referendum, any area that votes more than 60% to stay in the UK can stay in the UK. What would Sturgeon do? And I'm thinking, if that happened, and these two areas got to stay in the UK, I'd feel more Scottish in that side of Scotland than this banana republic that they want to set up in the other side, which, as you said, not all of them, but enough of them are. I really don't think they care about our country, and I thank you for what you changed my mind tonight on a lot of things, and I really appreciate it. So thanks for the talk, and everybody else that helped out tonight when we lost two speakers. Thanks for that.